Nick, Liz, in fact, we do exist as a podcast. I think we do.
Yeah, it has been a minute. It's been a fat minute.
Just a few months.
A little hiatus, but that's okay.
Yeah, Liz and I actually relocated to a different city than Nick lives in, and there is absolutely no technology that lets us record remotely.
Yeah, no, those programs don't exist.
No, it's just a matter of life circumstances.
Yeah, I mean, we all have very different schedules, and there's also the audio quality does kind of suffer a little bit sometimes when using some of those things. I feel like.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm kind of an audiophile, so I would need everything to sound perfect.
Yeah, sometimes Discord doesn't necessarily produce.
So we're here to talk about Andor Season 2. So as I mentioned, Nick is here, and Liz, again, my wife.
Hello.
Yeah. So it just ended not too long ago, and it was pretty damn good, I would say. That seems to be the general consensus. Before it came out, I kept reading, this is the best Star Wars show ever made. Like, you know, these really lofty things that people were saying about it. And I'm like, really? The best ever? I mean, I figured it would be good. The writers are definitely that good. But I was like, all right, well, I'll try not to get my expectations too sky high because I don't want to be disappointed. And honestly, Liz, when you and I started watching it, the first 2 episodes, I was like, I was kind of whelmed, you know,
Yeah.
Like it was just kind of slow. That was my thought. It was a little slow, but you actually liked it more than I did. I feel like
I really liked the first 2 episodes just off the bat, but I also think I had my expectations very, very low. I was going into it not expecting this to be good or interesting or something I'd even finish watching. So when the first episode kicked off, I was like, oh no, this is actually good. You know, acting's good, writing's good, all that.
So I really liked the first episode. I thought it was a tad slow, but generally I don't mind slow as much as some other people, as long as there's good character development. I thought the first episode was pretty good. Episode 2 is actually my only complaint of the entire season, really. I think episode 2 is just filler. And I think if maybe the things that happened in episode 2 became relevant later in the season, I might like it more, but we never see those forest people ever again.
yeah. Well, an interesting side note: one of those forest guys is Tony Gilroy's son.
Okay, that's neat.
And Tony Gilroy is like the creator of the show.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's no
Yeah, and
nepotism in Hollywood.
No, of course not. I think that's neat. That's cool and all. Little piece of trivia, but like it doesn't help me enjoy the episode more. You know, I think it's neat to know that, but I don't necessarily think it contributes to quality, but you know, it's cool.
Yeah, I think my thought through all that is I'm like, where is this going? You know, like what?
Yeah, and then it went nowhere. But sometimes things go nowhere and I'm okay with it. For example, related to the same thing, Andor stealing that ship actually went nowhere. We don't see that prototype TIE fighter ever again, and it didn't bother me because I feel like the point of that mission wasn't the mission. It was just showing us what Cassian's life is like in this moment in time, that he's still working for Luthen and he's doing these ridiculously dangerous jobs. And so that the ship mission was just to show us that, and kind of that he's almost at his wit's end with what he's doing in these missions, and it doesn't really matter what happens to the ship after.
And it's a year later, right? Isn't that like the words right at the beginning? Is that it's a year after season 1?
That sounds right. Yeah.
I think it's interesting that they really committed to the timing convention, like BBY. You
Yes.
know, it was I think 3 BBY was the very first couple of episodes, and then 2, and then 1. So, because I feel like that was just a fan thing. People would use this BBY thing, and I never really saw it, at least not in live action media.
Not in live action, no, but it's been a canon dating system, but they've just never really like talked about it a whole lot in like shows and movies. But part of that is because that date system didn't exist until after the Battle of Yavin because it couldn't have. BBY stands for Before the Battle of Yavin. So they couldn't, the characters couldn't be using for BBY before the Battle of Yavin happened because they didn't know the Battle of Yavin was going to happen. So any of the media that takes place before episode 4 couldn't have used it, basically. And then there's not a whole lot of media after it except for the sequels.
I didn't see the show right as it was happening, so I was trying not to get spoiled, but stuff kept popping up when I was online, and I'm like, crap. But one of the headlines that I saw, and I kind of flipped away from it, there was a little bit of controversy in the episode with Bix, where she has this encounter with this Imperial officer, this assault, basically. And I think some people were a little put off by that because it is pretty intense. And I mean, I didn't have a problem with it. It's an assault, and she survives it. She fights the guy off.
It's not like in some of these shows, like Game of Thrones would have shown something much. It would have shown it actually happening, and it. I don't think it was. I think they implied exactly as much as they needed to imply to get their point across with how horrible these people are, which is the point is they're making is these are irredeemable characters. I don't think they went too far with it personally. It's not like we had to watch, such an act happening. I think that would have been, way too far. But I do think Andor is by far the most adult themed Star Wars show we've ever had. And I think it was, I don't think it was a problem. I think it was kind of fitting for setting the tone of how dark of a season this was going to be. And I mean, we'll get into some things that happen later.
Yeah, it's on brand for Andor.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. And it's also, I saw the same thing. People are making kind of a big deal out of it. But I think it's real. That sort of thing does happen, especially during occupations. But also, it's not exactly something that Star Wars has never done before. I mean, in the original series, they show Leia as a slave girl, famously or infamously. And it's not as dark. It's not portrayed as being as dark, but it's the same thing, And I think they put that in more as to get the views up, if you will. But it's the same concept. So it's not. I don't think it's really anything new for Star Wars. I think it's just showing it in a different light and putting a different tone on it.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. I mean, maybe the way Leia's situation in Return of the Jedi was portrayed wasn't as dark as it should have been portrayed, actually. I think that's a modern complaint about the slave Leia scenes.
Well, yeah, because slave Leia was more of this almost gratuitous thing, which I personally don't really have a problem with. You have to view things being within their time, and that wasn't really a problem back then. But this is definitely a different vibe, which I liked. I think it's well done, personally.
It was definitely more violent, that's for sure. It was pretty violent.
Yeah, and I know I'm kind of talking in circles a little bit, but the point, I really do think the point was to show that this is an irredeemable character. These are the kinds of people, by and large, that are working for the Empire and supporting the Empire are these kinds of people. Now, of course, that's not always not always the case. We've seen in other books and media that there are also some good people that work for the Empire and didn't realize what they were getting into. But the point was to show how bad of a person this is. It's not like they had somebody we're supposed to be kind of rooting for also doing this. It's not like they had, Andor is such an anti-hero. Maybe he falls victim to his own urges, and then we're supposed to kind of be rooting for this guy who's a rapist. That's not how this was done at all. This was to show how horrible of an act this was. We're not rooting for this guy, and we're rooting for Bix the whole way.
Well, yeah, and she killed him, which I was surprised by that. I'm like, whoa, she killed the guy.
And I like that too, because it wasn't this badass girl boss, I'm gonna kick this guy's ass. She was seriously hurt by, which I think is realistic, as realistic as it could be for that situation. So I really like that part too. It wasn't like she was just, karate kicking him, going full girl boss. It felt desperate, and that's why she killed him. She didn't kill him because she could. She basically killed him on accident, That's how I took it.
And out of necessity.
Exactly.
Yeah, she was fighting for her life.
Yeah. And I do think that helped, because that happens in episode 3, right? And I do think that helped set the tone for kind of some of the rest of the season, where you see the heroes having to do things out of necessity, whether it's for their own life or for the cause, as it comes to be later, that we actually do find ourselves rooting for them to just straight up off certain people later on, and it really sets a much darker tone. Not that season 1 didn't have a dark tone, it very much did. But, I mean, we're also very happy to see them blow up Dr. Gorst later, and just we're happy to see the bad guys lose and actually see them lose instead of it happening like off screen for the kids or something.
And so in those first 3 episodes, one of the things they did was establish Gorman, which ended up being this really important storyline through the rest of the show. Honestly, I was having trouble following because it was like this big conference, they were all planning what was going on. And I vaguely understood that they wanted to create, incite a rebellion against them. So then they would have an excuse to come in and institute martial law and do all this stuff. But there was a lot of it that I wasn't really getting. And I was like, well, maybe it'll become clear as time goes on. But I knew Deidre was like this extra lower layer of cover, and she was going to do something else. But I remember watching it, and I'm like, this is kind of boring. This is kind of convoluted. I don't know what they're talking about. So, but it totally worked out later.
Yeah,
it made sense.
That's not the only place in this season that I was mildly confused, but most of the places I got confused ended up being temporarily confusing. And I understood it later. And that might have been one of those times. But it seemed to me like in that kind of conference thing, they knew what they wanted to do. They just didn't know how to get there. They knew we need to mine Gorman, and we need to not look like the bad guys by doing so. It's like kind of the purpose. And then it was Dedra's idea to be like, you need like a rebellion you can count on to do the wrong thing, or she words it something like that. So it's kind of her idea to incite a rebellion against the Empire.
I really like that scene because I think it establishes the Empire as not only like there's these bad guys, we have Emperor Palpatine, we have Darth Vader, and they're the ultimate bad guys. It shows that the entire structure it's a fascist government, and that is how fascist governments operate. If they want something from, whatever other people, it's done through propaganda. And it manipulates everyone into thinking, even if they're on the right side of the issue that's being created, it manipulates everyone's thinking. And I think that makes the Empire much more real and much more scary than just like, oh, we have these 2 bad guys and Darth Vader force chokes people, which is also scary. But this is scary on like a bigger level.
Well, and I think it kind of explores, how a fascist government operates. It's not only these overt shows of power, like we have stormtroopers in the streets intimidating people and certain overt acts of violence, but it's also this like undercurrent of manipulation of the population. I thought that was a cool way of expanding our view of the Empire. Because it wasn't really that before. And it just makes you hate them that much more, That was cool. That was very cool. The other thing, which was very surprising, and I'm not sure how I feel about it yet, is that they completely sidelined, was it B2? The droid?
Yeah. I think do they call him BMO? Yeah.
BMO?
BMO.
Yeah, B2 EMO, but they kind of like leave the 2 out and they call him BMO.
Yeah, but they just like, we're leaving this planet now, and they just leave him there.
Yeah.
And I'm guessing that was just because they didn't have time.
I'm assuming they didn't have time or really a whole lot of place for him. I feel like when you watch the rest of the season, I can't think of a good place for him to be put. I feel like he's a very sensitive droid and a very vulnerable droid, and if I don't know, it's better for him to be left in a more stable environment. I mean, we've had whole conversations about the how these droids are very much so sentient, and I think it's better for him to be left behind. I mean, you saw him playing with the other droid. Remember when they were like racing each other?
Yeah.
I love that scene. I feel like they put that scene there to remind us that no, we didn't forget about him. He's just not really relevant to the plot at this point in time.
You know, actually, now that we're talking about it, I think that they saw him as a child, kind of a kid, and it's like let him have his childhood with these other droids, let him play and not be subjected to all these really serious and, you know, violent things that a kid probably shouldn't be around.
Yeah, with his demeanor and the way he speaks, he is very much so seemingly underdeveloped and
Emotionally.
yeah, he's kind of like a kid with PTSD. And
Yeah.
just let him stay.
Well, I also think just from a writing perspective is he's kind of a comic relief character, and they didn't need that or want that in the show for the most of it.
Plus, if you want, like, they knew that K2SO is going to be coming back. We'll get to that. But there's your comic relief, you know,
That's
here
true.
and there anyway. They knew they were going to have an even better comic relief later. You know, but yeah, I didn't really think a whole lot about that until you brought it up, that, yeah, he is kind of pushed aside. But I'm okay with it, I think.
Yeah, I don't, like you said, now that we've seen the show, I don't know what relevance he would have had, or it just wouldn't have been the right kind of tone to set for what they wanted. And it was so dense. Like, where would you put him in there?
Yeah, and in season 1, he had a good place being, you know, his relationship with Marva was relevant because Marva was so relevant and, you know, things like that. But he just became less relevant as Andor moved on to the larger scale war, basically.
Yeah, it was like he was Andor's son, and, you know, Marva was Andor's mother, so it would have been like his grandmother, you know, and she died, and he was so upset by it. That was so sad.
Yeah. And then, not related to BMO, but in the same scene, actually, where he's like racing the other droids, has nothing to do with the plot, but I thought it was just funny and cool to see. Did you see the kid playing with the marionette ATST puppet on the table?
No.
No, I don't think I saw that.
There's a kid with like a string puppet, a marionette puppet that's an ATST, and he's playing with it on the table, and I thought that was so cool. Like, just, I don't know.
That would be a fun toy.
Yeah, he's just walking his ATST across the table. I'm like, that is so cool. And I also thought it was interesting that that's the toy they chose to give him because, you know, they all hate the Empire. But is it a result of propaganda that the kids want Empire toys?
Absolutely. Who's to say that the Empire didn't manufacture it and you want to get them when they're young? Like, oh,
Yeah.
you know, we're benign, we're cool.
Yeah,
we're
so I
fun.
thought it was interesting to have, like, that was their choice of toy. It's like kind of a fun, playful thing, but it also actually has some interesting implications of why these good people would want their kids to play with Imperial toys.
Yeah, that's true.
But I guess it's not a whole lot different than kids playing with little green army men in a country that has a not particularly great government.
Well, and I think it's in episode 3, and this is just a comment on how the show was done. I love the scene. We haven't really talked about Mon Mothma as much, but first of all, I really loved her character in this show. I think that she had the potential to be a great character, and they used that potential to the fullest. I think she was probably one of my favorite characters.
She's one of the best written Star Wars characters at this point,
Yeah.
honestly.
Absolutely.
I agree. So this whole thing with her daughter's wedding, and she talks to Luthen, and essentially she finds out her childhood friend, for all these reasons, he's going to be eliminated. And she, for lack of a better word, crashes out. And I love the way they did that with the music. It was cutting in between
Yes, such a good scene.
Andor and Bix and all of them, and then her, and then it cuts faster and faster, and then that music is just over the entire thing.
Yes, I was just talking to my dad about this scene. Like, we were just talking about how good of a scene that is. With the scenes changing back and forth, but the music never leaving. You have her dancing, and the way Genevieve O'Reilly puts it, because she actually, I read an interview where she's talking about that scene, and as she puts it, Mon was dancing to keep from screaming.
Yeah.
And I think that is such a good scene. But then when it cuts back over to the rescue or whatever, the music never cuts out, and that music adds to the chaos of the other scene.
Right, because it feels like it should be a juxtaposition between these two things, but it's also kind of very similar. It's both chaos and it's like desperate almost, because even though she's not, in danger of being killed herself or anything like that, she feels that this is now very, very real, I think. Maybe for the first time more than ever.
Yeah, I mean, that scene was cool. But did you see the party droid? Really yes. The best part of that whole thing.
Yes, the disco droid. And I think that scene, while most importantly a great scene because of all the things that we just said, another like kind of side note I love about that scene was that it really continues to show when Star Wars is in the hands of the right people, they also continue to do a lot of world building when they really, even in cases where they really don't have to. Like, this is what Chandrilan dance music would sound like, and this is what their dancing would look like in their culture, and they made something new for it. Like, I don't know.
Well, that entire wedding was a showcase for all of these customs that they had that nobody was aware of.
Yeah, and they really didn't contribute to the plot all that much, but they contributed to the world building, and it was such a great way to keep doing that.
Yeah, well, and there's also that really great, powerful scene where Mon Mothma is with her daughter, and they're about to walk out, and Mon Mothma gives her daughter like this one last out. He's like, let's just come away with me. You don't have to go through with this, and she was talking about her mother being drunk, at her wedding or whatever, and that great, like, horribly painful line, I wish you were drunk, so you wouldn't be telling me this kind of thing, and just, like, walks out there. And it was just so painful. You could feel that horrible infliction of pain on Mon Mothma, and then it goes into the dance scene, and she's trying to deal with her friend being killed and her daughter getting married in this way that she is just not for.
It's crazy.
Yeah, and I like the way they did his death because they didn't show it. Yeah. It's just implied. In another more overt, dare I say, dumber Star Wars show, they would have had maybe some kind of thing go wrong. There's like a battle between them and it goes down crashing. None of that.
He just gets flown away.
And there's a look because Cinta is there, right? Mm-hmm. Like, oh, I got a new driver at the last minute. And what's going to happen, and I think it's much more powerful to not show it.
Yes.
I thought that was just really well done.
Agreed.
And not showing it, really continues a lot of the tone of everything relating to Mon's part of the fight, in that almost nothing that Mon does is seen by anyone. And here's something that Mon's responsible for that even we don't get to see. Like how undercover everything that she was related to was, as opposed to somebody like Andor who's more directly in the fight. And seeing both of them back and forth fighting in completely different but very necessary ways was very, very neat.
I was kind of like confused, on the fence about what they actually meant. There was these conversations between Mon Mothma and her friend, and I wasn't sure if they were implying that a relationship between the two, or like there was going to be some encounter between the two, like, you're not holding up your end of the bargain, I'm going to need something from you, something more. And I'm like, was that like a quid pro quo, like a sexual thing? And I wasn't sure where they were going, what they meant by that, but it was definitely not that.
I took it as it was more about money, but I think that it's also it hits her so hard because she thought she could trust this person, and she thought this person was as in as she was, and it's her childhood friend. And I also read into it a little bit, like for a moment she doesn't actually know what he's asking exactly. She was like, is this a proposition, or does he want money? Or I don't think it's very clear to her, but it is clear to her that like this isn't good, you know.
And maybe he didn't know what he was asking for. Maybe he wanted to see what she might offer.
Yeah. Well, they always keep talking about like find a number, find the number.
Yeah.
And it's a kind of implied it would be a ridiculous amount of money that they can't give.
Yeah. I don't know if you want to move into episode 4, but
Yeah.
episode 4 is where I start to, if I'm remembering the plot right, episode 4 I think is where I start to get a little bit confused briefly, and this is one of those cases where I actually think I stay confused, but it ends up not mattering. Is the whole Wilman engines building thing with Saw Gerrera.
Yes.
I still, even at the end of the season, don't fully know what was going on there. And it ends up not seeming to matter a whole lot other than to show the kind of person Saw is and to continue to show that Saw is a terrible person fighting on the right side,
Yeah.
But I don't really fully understand. And I looked it up and I already forgot like how that whole engine coding thing works. But there's a whole, there is like an explanation out there. I just don't think they did a very good job of explaining it to us while we're watching it as to what is exactly going on with those engines.
Yeah. I was very interested because I saw it as kind of Wilman going down a dark path, maybe, or a path that isn't the best for him, and that becoming a conflict. And it never really gets played out. The thing that they're tapping into is obviously dangerous, but it also apparently it's how I was reading it. It's like meth.
Yeah, it does seem
space meth.
Yeah, because then I think it's the following episode, like at the very end, Saw's like, "Oh, take your mask off," and they both just get high together. And I feel like that's the last time we even see.
Were those two things connected? Obviously, I'm a little confused too. I read it as like a power source, some kind of like thing that would make them more self-sufficient so that they didn't have to rely on
But
the
like a
larger
very
rebellion.
volatile power source.
And then a byproduct was like these fumes or something that would come off of it. That's how I
Yeah.
saw it.
That's how exactly. That's how I saw it too. I thought it would have been cool if it would have been played out that Wilman kind of gets addicted to this stuff, and that's a whole arc of, how maybe Saw Gerrera almost messes something up because it's mentioned later on that Saw Gerrera split from the rebellion. So maybe it's implied that this is why he splits, but it's not. We can think about what it might be, but it's not really written out for us at all.
Yeah. And speaking of those fumes, which I don't know if it really matters if it is or isn't, but are those fumes supposed to be what's in his mask in Rogue One?
Yes, I think her and I made a comment about that. I always saw it as just an oxygen mask because he's so
I did
messed
too,
up.
until watching this.
Yes, and I don't know if they were kind of doing a retcon there, and they were trying to say that actually he's just
huffing?
he's hooked on this drug.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you could even see it as a way of like, and this happens in the real world, if somebody wants followers, they addict them to drugs, and then those people are now reliant on that person. He gets all his gang kind of addicted to this and like, well, now I have the power to dole it out. And it's just this extra way of keeping his followers, which makes him even more of a horrible person.
Right.
If that's the case.
And it is interesting to, once again, continue to showcase that, every once in a while we see like a good guy on the side of the bad guys, and they also continue to show Saw the bad guy on the side of the good guys. And they continue to kind of blur the lines between good and bad. And we've talked about in previous episodes, whether or not that's a good thing for Star Wars, because Star Wars started out as very black and white, and we've gotten away from that. And there are times where I think they do go too far, especially when they start making the Jedi too questionable or the Sith too likable. But in the case where we're not dealing with the Jedi and Sith, it doesn't bother me at all when they blur the lines between good and bad, because they're just showing the wars part of Star Wars, and they're showing that this is war on both sides. And I think it's very interesting.
I agree. I think it makes it more realistic, more adult, which I think is, or how I saw was kind of the whole point of Andor. It's Star Wars for adults.
Yeah.
You know, fully.
I do like that they've gotten Forrest Whitaker to come back and reprise his role over because he's so good. I love the way he portrays that role. And actually, I was surprised that it was not depicted how he got like his legs blown off. I thought for sure they were going to show how that happened, but it still happened somewhere off screen between Rogue One and the series.
Yeah, and they do so many time jumps in this series, or in this season in particular, that I was actually surprised by, to see them jump times so often. But once we're reminded that this is the last season and they need to bring us up to Rogue One, it makes sense. But yeah, who knows when exactly that happened. But I did like that his appearance was a little bit different, a little bit, not drastically, but a little bit closer to his Clone Wars kind of appearance at the start. And by the time we're at the end of the series, he looks the way he looked in Rogue One, minus the missing limbs.
So drugs will do.
Yeah.
I know. I also like the dynamic, and that's in episode 4, right? Between Bix and Andor. Or am I jumping
Is that where
ahead?
they're in the apartment on Coruscant? Or is
Yes.
that the third 3 episodes?
I have 0 notes on episode 5. I don't know why. So I don't remember.
Somewhere in that time, Bix and Andor are in this hiding out, essentially in this apartment. And I thought that was a very, very good scenes between them, and showing that it weighs on Bix, especially. She's so for the rebellion and for the cause, but it weighs on her having to do these, you know, unarguably terrible things to other people.
And then showing her new addiction.
Yeah.
Yeah. I thought that was so great how they did that, where she's having this nightmare about this kid being interrogated. And it was at Andor's, what's the word I'm looking for? Request, or he was the one who made this happen. And the only reason is because he saw her face. So he did it to protect her. And they used this also other very questionable character who is in the rebellion, but it's a guy that she ends up putting that thing on his head and torturing him or whatever. But they did it. It didn't make sense at first. You're like, what's going on here? You know, but she, that haunts her, and she ends up using. And the other part of it is that Andor's always gone. He goes on these missions and she never sees him. And I do really, really like their love story. But, she just can't handle.
And then being plagued by her memories of Dr. Gorst, and, her torture, has weighed on her as well.
Yeah, there was a couple of scenes between those two in that apartment. I'm like, God, this dialogue is so good.
Yeah, it's like the writing is so incredibly good. There's not a whole lot of sci-fi shows where I can't wait for more conversations.
Yeah, seriously.
Yeah.
like I'm waiting for more lasers and superpowers, and like this was a show where I was like, I can't wait to hear them talk more, because the dialogue was so well written.
You know what I think are great scenes, and I was very surprised by it, is Deidre and Syril live together, and they're in this relationship, and they're both highly neurotic.
Yes.
And that's exactly what a relationship between those two people would be like.
Are those the episodes where she has the conversations with Cyril's mom?
Yes.
I love that so much. Like, you don't like her really across the board, but you do kind of like her in those scenes because his mom is so annoying.
God, she's such a terrible person, and it's perfectly informed Cyril's character, because that's why he is the way he is, because he's constantly been made to be not good enough.
Yeah, I also think that he is a very well-written character, and I feel like they purposefully wrote him so that we wouldn't know how to feel about him, because he has these redeeming qualities, but he also sucks in so many ways.
Well, what I described it to Alex as is he genuinely thinks he's doing the right thing. He genuinely believes in the Empire. He thinks this is the way to bring the peace to the galaxy. But he he's doing all the wrong things for what he thinks is the right reason.
Yes.
And I think that's what does make him likable at times, is that you can tell he does believe in this and it's genuine.
But then you get irritated about how naive he is and how does he not see this? And
exactly. He's like, I kind of see his character as like a child who's never really grown up. You know, he's kind of fitting the shoes of an adult, but he can't quite get there. And he's just kind of chasing after wanting to be accepted, wanting success, and also wanting to do the right thing. And he just can never quite get there. I think his character is very good. It's very tragic.
yes.
Well, it's almost like Darth Maul, where, you know, he's rolling the ball up the hill and it rolls back down and he just does it Sisyphus, you know, and it's like he does terrible things, but you also kind of feel for him. And then he does something else terrible and you're like, no, I don't feel for him, you know, and you kind of oscillate back and forth between really pitying this guy.
Yes.
And then you're like, oh, God, he does something sucky.
Yes.
Also, that scene in the apartment while Dedra's talking to his mother. Apparently, I saw a clip of an interview where he lies on the bed and then he's just like in a perfect straight line. Very funny. But apparently that was unscripted.
Oh, really?
He just did that. Like, he was really just like supposed to be off camera, like sitting or something. And he just laid down on the bed like that and they caught it. So it was this unscripted moment, but I thought it was so good. It fits his character
very
so
in
well.
character, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I didn't know that. That's really cool. Well, and I think one small tidbit about that relationship between Syril and his mom, and this is a testament to the writing, they could have very easily made him like this scared puppy and never challenging his mom, but he's flinging insults back at her constantly. It's not like, you know, he's just cowering. He may deep down feel like he's not good enough because of her, but he fights with her. You know, and she doesn't skip a beat. She continually is laying just these insults on him, you know. And I thought that's a very subtle, more realistic thing. Like, he's not necessarily a pushover. He fights with her. It doesn't matter. He's still inside this child that's not good enough, constantly trying to prove himself, wants to be liked and respected, and he's never any of those things eventually.
Yeah,
You know?
and then the scenes with Dedra and his mom do add, you know, even though she's objectively a very bad person, do add some humanity to Dedra, and I think that's interesting. It's something that Star Wars didn't originally do. There were a lot of faceless villains, and the ones who weren't faceless were just pretty much evil for the sake of being evil, like Palpatine or even Tarkin. Really was just a generic bad guy. And don't get me wrong, I love Tarkin. I think Tarkin's a great villain. I think he serves his purpose perfectly. But adding some extra humanity to villains just makes it more realistic. And I think this show has shown how you can add extra humanity to your villains without having to make them borderline likable, which I think too many shows do nowadays, where they try to make the villains redeemable in some ways because they feel like it's the only way to make them more human. I think we can see here that that's not the case. We still know Dedra's horrible, but having her fight with her mother-in-law definitely adds some humanity to her character.
Well, she kind of like went that extra level, you know, she like out alphaed her.
Yeah,
And it's so satisfying.
it is.
Well,
It is.
one like really, it's small, but it struck me, which is like you see her in like leisure wear. We've only ever seen her in this like really nicely pressed Imperial uniform, but she's like in this like Imperial leisure wear,
Yeah.
you know? And I was just like, oh, she actually has off time and she does things in her off time. And it was just a small little thing, you know, that I thought was really good.
I like that part. I like her character. She's a bad person, but I think her character is very well written, and how even someone who has these moments of humanity, she's not a good person. Like, she will do anything and everything, undercut anyone for her personal gain.
Yes, absolutely. And no, I'm going to jump too far. I do want, because like I feel like I have a lot to say about Episode 8.
The Last
there's
Jedi.
Yeah, no, I already said a lot about that in the past. But yeah, episode 8 of season 2 of Andor, I feel like I have a lot to say about it. So I'll probably
That's okay if
I'll,
you
I'll
jump.
probably wait. Well,
That's all right.
there's just that great scene at the end of episode 8 where Dedra is like, I feel like she's coming to terms with what she just did, and she's like straightening her uniform constantly, and she's like kind of in like panic mode, like pacing around the room. And I just thought the acting was so good in that scene. She's just by herself in a room, and the scene's like maybe 10 seconds long. But just the acting in that brief part was so good, where she's like in like little mini panic mode by herself after her plan has just gone off exactly the way it was supposed to go off. And she's like, it almost seems to me like she's having a hard time coming to terms with what she's just been responsible for.
I think it's that, and I think it's also not so much that she feels for the people there, because I don't think she does. I think she's realizing that she successfully used Syril.
Oh, yeah.
I think that might be more of it, because she did it, and she knew what she was going to do, but when it actually happened, I think it's almost maybe more nerves that he's going to find out.
Right.
That's kind of how I read into it. Not that she really has regret for what happened, but more like, oh my gosh, I pulled this off and I used my boyfriend to do it. What now? You know?
Yeah.
I mean, that would be in line with her character of just being kind of irredeemable.
Yes.
You know, the only time she would be nervous about something is if her own skin is on the line.
Right.
You know, she doesn't regret it. She just is afraid of getting caught.
Yeah.
I read a thing about, I don't know the actress's name who plays Deidre, but it was this kind of thing worked out between her and Tony Gilroy, where like they could very easily have had this arc where she kind of, you know, becomes more and more likable or kind of turns away or something. And she was adamant and he was in agreement. No, she will remain this bad person throughout, you know, because that's who she is. And you can have these moments where she appears maybe more likable, but none of it changes the fact that in the end, she just is what she is. And she also does believe in the cause, one of those true believers.
Yeah.
And it makes it all the more satisfying at the end, where the worst thing that could possibly happen is being betrayed by the very instrument, you know, the empire that she served for so many years, faithfully.
Yes.
You know?
Another thing I'd like to bring up. So episode 5, which is what we're vaguely on, is called I Have Friends Everywhere, that's the first time you hear that. And then throughout the rest of the season, it's kind of like this code word. A few times it's used officially, but a lot of the time it's like this unofficial or it's not this agreed upon thing necessarily. It's just kind of they all know about it. Another thing is in this episode we get to see more of Clea, Luthen's
Also,
assistant.
now one of the best written Star Wars characters ever.
Incredible. I love
Yes.
her. We'll get to her.
So, anyways, we were introduced to her more, and we once again see this darker side to Luthen, because in episode 5 he sends Cassian to Gorman. Andor comes back and he says they're not ready. They can't pull it off. And what Luthen's response essentially is, it doesn't matter. If Gorman will burn, it'll burn brightly. So he's implying that whether or not Gorman succeeds or fails, even if they fail, it'll be good for the whole rebellion because they'll be martyrs, essentially.
Yeah. I think that Luthen's like Gorman will burn brightly statement really solidifies that he is not any better than Saw in my mind. Like, and it's, I feel like it's very easy watching Andor to view Saw as like so extreme, but like Luthen is really not much better. He's just not on the front lines. Like, and that makes Saw seem more extreme because he's out there, I don't know, in the character's minds being a terrorist, but Luthen's just as bad. Like, yeah, then this planet will be a message if everybody dies on it, which is pretty whack.
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the differences between Saw and Luthen, Luthen...
Is that Saw's a drug addict and Luthen isn't?
Well, there's that. There are a few differences. One, I see Luthen as one smarter and more self-aware. Saw just kind of is what he is. You know, he has some level of self-awareness about his tactics and you know.
I feel like for better or worse, Saw is pretty well aware of the crap he pulls.
Yeah, I don't know. Luthen, maybe he's more poetic about it.
For sure.
Yeah, you wouldn't see Saw doing a monologue.
No, one of the best monologues in Star Wars history is not coming from Forrest Whitaker.
Yeah, and it's hard to Jesus. It's hard to hate on Luthen. Like, clearly he's not a good guy. Clearly. But it's like his actions, like in the episodes after this, you know, which we'll get to, it's like you are so torn because they are so shitty, you know, in one aspect, and yet you really like them, you know.
Yeah, and I think that they're on what we would all consider to be, and I know this show kind of tries to blur the line a little bit, but I think it helps that they're all on what we would consider objectively the good guys' side.
Yeah.
And so it makes it a lot easier to root for them. There are like other shows that non-Star Wars related shows that like try to get you to root for the bad guy. That's like not even a good person at all. These guys at the very least are on the right side. They're just like bad people fighting for the right side.
Well, they just make the Empire so horrible that you kind of forgive the tactics that they use because it's like for the greater good. No matter how crappy, you know, Luthen is and the things that he does, we are constantly reminded of why he's doing it, about how bad the Empire is, and we kind of forgive it. You know?
Well, and it's like that saying, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. That's really what he is. But you could also make the argument that the rebellion needs people like that who are just as ruthless as some people in the Empire, because otherwise these things aren't going to get done that need to get done. And objectively, without putting, you know, morals to it, he is right. If Gorman burns, it is going to be good for the rebellion.
Yeah, he's right.
We might not like it.
It's like that meme with Anthony Mackie. He's out of line, but he's right. Like that's basically.
That's a nice way of putting it. He's out of line.
Yeah, he's out of line, but he's right. But and this all is very consistent. One thing you have to appreciate about this show is how consistent it's been from its first season to its second, despite how long of a hiatus there was between the two of them. Is this all is a great like continuation and callback to Luthen's famous monologue from season 1, where, you know, I'm forced to use the weapons of my enemy to defeat them, and his whole thing about how he has given up on his conscience and he's been forced to accept that. And so in that aspect, I would say that, yeah, Luthen is incredibly self-aware, to your point, that he knows that he's not exactly a good person, but he just believes that it's something that has to get done and he'll be the one to do it so no one else has to. So there's something kind of oddly noble about that.
Well, that line that you just said, he's given up on his conscience, I think that's a great way to put it. And there's something really admirable about giving up on I don't know, something about that you just commit to it, fully commit to it, you know, and there really is something admirable.
And ironically, it's because he thinks he's doing the right thing. It's weird to say those two things at the same time. Like, he's given up on his conscience in order to do the right thing. Sounds contradictory, but that's really how he feels.
And to that point of specifically the situation on Gorman, while I was watching it, I wondered, does Luthen have an inkling that this might be a setup? Because he's so smart, it almost seems unbelievable that he wouldn't have thought of the possibility that the Empire would allow a rebellion to continue for their purposes. I wonder if he thought about that.
Yeah, I do think there's some intentional irony, and so it's very easy for us to be like, how are they not seeing this? Like, it's obviously a trap, but it's like, you know, we see, as the viewers, we see everything. We see all sides of it, and I do feel like it's a lot more obvious to us than it might be to someone in Luthen's position, especially because he is so behind the scenes and so undercover. Although he's great at getting information, I do feel like I don't know. He is great at getting information, but I feel like there's things he could easily miss having to force himself to be so undercover, and there's just things he doesn't see.
Yeah, that's fair.
I think that was a great choice on the writers' end to give the audience way more information than the characters have, because the entire time you're just like this slow motion disaster, and you know that this group on Gorman is being set up, and you're just the whole time, no, and you know that Deidre is backstabbing Syril, and you're just like, dang it, it's just like this slow sense of like this disaster that's unfolding, and they don't know, and it really adds to this just kind of foreboding as you're watching it.
It's like we have a satellite view of a car headed towards train tracks where the signal and the arms are not working, and we can see the trains coming from our satellite view, but we know the train conductor doesn't know the arms aren't working, and we know the car can't see the train, and we're just forced to watch it all happen because they can't see each other.
Yeah.
And it has this very interesting effect that when we're in the heist scene, it doesn't feel at all satisfying, even though it does go wrong in the way that Syntha gets killed. But even if it wasn't for that, they successfully pulled off the heist, but to the audience, it doesn't feel satisfying because this was supposed to happen.
Yeah. And then I don't remember if we already talked about the listening device removal, but like the listening device removal scene, back and forth between that and the heist scene, and like you're on the edge of your seat like for two completely separate events at once, and the way they went back and forth I thought was really well done. And then you finally see a little bit of Luthen and Clea's humor at the end of that episode, which I thought was funny because they're so serious characters, and the show is so serious, but they wrote these characters to have a little bit of dark humor at the end of the episode when she's like, I think Luthen says to Clea as they're walking away, we should have just killed Krennic while we were up there. And then they laugh about it. Like,
yeah.
I guess that takes us into episode 7, which is a huge time jump, which I thought was jarring at first. And I thought I was like, oh man, I'm missing a year of content, but it ended up not feeling that way. But each time jump, I was worried I was going to feel like it was too much of a jump. And each time it wasn't.
Agreed.
The only thing I can even remember about episode 7 is the Force healer.
Right. That's right.
And that's where, Andor broke their one rule, which is no Force users, but they didn't do it so drastically. It was just enough to kind of make their point. But I felt like the Force healer's statements, as much as I think Andor is nearly perfect as a show, I did feel like the Force healer statements were a little bit too vague.
Right. I would bet that was a fight between Tony Gilroy and Disney, who really wanted that in there, and he softened it. So he made it so vague because he just did not want it there, and it was just one of those things where he, did the best he could with something that he did not want there. That's kind of how I read that.
And in terms of the story, it's almost a little bit confusing because the woman who's a Force healer, she's old enough to have been around before Order 66, right? She wouldn't have been young, but she wouldn't have been a child either. So it would make more sense, I think, while I was watching, I was thinking this would make more sense if she was younger and she didn't really understand the Force. So she would be vague because she's not confident in what this is. She just has this feeling or this vision. But since she is older, you can assume she's been around Jedi and this and that, and she must have some sort of training, you would think. It kind of makes it a little bit unbelievable because we're sitting there because we know about the Jedi. We're like, why won't you just spit it out? That's kind of the feeling that I had.
Yeah, I think maybe their goal was to kind of try to bridge the gap between episodes 3 and 4. So this is Star Wars episodes 3 and 4, because it is true after you watch the prequels and you see, all of these Jedi, like hundreds of Jedi, and probably, thousands more across the galaxy that are active Jedi. And then all of a sudden, like 15 years later, the Jedi are nothing but a legend that people only half believe in. And you got people like Han that don't believe in the Force at all. And it's like, wait a minute, but episode 3 wasn't that long ago, and the Jedi were very active in episode 3. And I think maybe this Force healer person kind of helps bridge the gap between, like, is it just legendary voodoo mumbo jumbo to these people, or is it real? And it kind of maybe helps show the fade away from that in the galaxy.
And I also think we were talking about this off camera, but I think that the idea that Yavin is like an outer rim planet, right? That's kind of the idea.
I honestly don't remember.
Okay.
I don't remember its geography, like the galaxy's geography very well.
I don't know if they've established where in the galaxy Yavin is.
Anyways, it's not Coruscant.
Yeah.
So you could also say that there's only so many Jedi. So maybe on Yavin 4, they had never really heard of Jedi or even seen a Jedi to begin with. You know what I mean? Even pre-Order 66.
I remember we were talking about that off camera.
Yeah.
That like basically even thousands of Jedi is not necessarily a lot when you have a galaxy of this size. And so even though we've seen hundreds of Jedi on screen, that's because they're showing the viewers the cool space wizards, but that doesn't mean the vast majority of the galaxy is familiar with Jedi as much as we are. That's why they made movies about them, because they're special, because they're not the normal people of the galaxy. And so maybe they weren't as well known even in their time.
Well, 2 points, and this is just a complete, you know how there's like holes in Star Wars and fans have to come in with their theories and like fill in the gaps?
Oh, yeah.
Especially after watching this show, I wonder if the reason that the Jedi are just kind of not well known in this time period was deliberate on the part of the Empire. They used disinformation to, either outright say they didn't exist, or they were legend, or they were bad, or they were whatever. You know what I mean? They made a point to just like erase them from history, and I could totally see that happening, that it's also slightly calculated. The other thing, and I don't remember if this was on or off camera that we were talking about, which is the rebels use the Force / Jedi just kind of in their, I don't know what you would call it. They say, may the Force be with you. They say that, and do they know exactly what that means? I mean, is it just because like the person next to them says that as like a goodbye, as like a good luck? Why is it that the rebellion kind of cloaks itself in this mythology of the Jedi or the Force? I don't know. They've never really said why.
I think it's probably like something, how people say like, oh, bless you, even if they're an atheist. I think it's kind of one of those.
Yeah, because what's his name in season 1 says it. I think in the first episode, the guy that covers for Andor in episode 1 of the first season says, I think he says, "May the Force be with you" to Andor at one point in that first episode, if I remember correctly. And the only reason I even saw the first episode of season 1 of Andor anytime recently is because when I went to watch Andor season 2, I accidentally started from episode 1 of season 1, and it had been so long since I had seen it that it took me a solid 15 minutes to realize I was watching the first episode of Andor. like I watched 15 minutes of episode 1, and I was like, man, this is a really long recap. I thought they were doing a recap, and I was like, what? I feel like they're giving a lot of detail. And then I paused it, and I was like, oh, wait.
Classic Nick Starks.
I'm just watching season 1. Anyway, but I feel like in that first 15 minutes that I accidentally rewatched of Andor, that one guy says, "May the Force be with you" to Cassian.
I think that's really ironic if they just say this, but they don't really know a lot about what's behind that. If they really are just kind of clueless about the Jedi and about that history, and yet they're still saying things like this, I think that's very ironic.
I think Liz's analogy is probably pretty accurate. Like the bless you statement is like there's actually quite a bit of superstition associated with why people even say bless you when somebody sneezes, and most people don't even know why they say it. And so I feel like it is pretty similar.
It's just a custom.
Yeah.
That we just all do it. We don't really know why.
But yeah. And then episode 7 is also the first time we see the U-Wing in Andor the show, which is great.
Right, because that's in Rogue One.
Yeah.
That's right.
All right. So the only other thing in 7 that's really stuck out is that's when Wilmon convinces Cassian to go to Gorman with him to assassinate Dedra. Because she's there. And
Which
that kind of
takes us to
brings us into episode 8.
Which is episode 8. I have to try to contain myself while we talk about this because I think it might be the best episode of anything I've ever seen. Like, it is just, I don't know. I just think it's a true masterpiece of an episode. It's like you're on the edge of your seat the whole time, but it's not overwhelming. And the fact that Star Wars makes you, like Star Wars that has historically been pretty family friendly, has now made us root for this guy to assassinate this unarmed woman. Like, and the whole episode, like anytime he's about to shoot her in the head, you're like, yes, finally. And then he can't. And you're like, dang it. And it's like, that's just not, historically, Star Wars has not been that dark, but like we want that, like Dedra needs to die and we want Cassian to assassinate her so badly. And we're just,
the whole episode's so well done. One of my favorite parts is it's really the beginning where the protest is starting and you see all these people kind of streaming in and they're arming themselves with like Molotovs and stuff. And then it cuts to Dedra and her people being like, okay, is everyone in? We're gonna close off the exits. And it's like this terrible feeling of you know what's happening and you can't do anything to stop it. And then that gets reflected in, the leader of the rebellion. I believe it's Kaido.
sure. I honestly don't remember.
Anyways, the leader of the Gorman rebellion, he kind of turns around and he's like, wait a minute, this is a trap. He realizes it last minute, but it's too late. And he's literally out in the street trying to tell people like, no, go back, it's a trap. And no one's listening to him. It's already caught fire. And it just really reflects this helpless feeling that you're feeling as a viewer. And
that feeling that we've talked about having for the entirety of this season has led us up to episode 8. You know, that feeling of the train and the car coming at each other and we have the satellite view. Like, this is the moment of impact that we've been hoping was going to get stopped up until this point. Like, up until episode 8, there's been a constant, maybe it won't happen. Maybe the good guys will figure something out. And episode 8 is where we truly know for a certain that, no, the bad thing is going to happen. And then it does.
Well, I think one of the great things about this show is that all throughout the preceding episodes, you think in terms of Star Wars, and you're like, okay, at some point, this rebel group on Gorman, they'll figure it out. You know, because that's kind of what Star Wars does. Like, oh, they were set up, but the good guys are going to win in the end. They'll figure it out, you know, and I kind of kept waiting for that. I'm like, are they really just going to get wiped out? Like, that's it? Like, and that's exactly what they do in the show.
It was very Infinity War. Where you're
yes.
Like, oh, the bad guys are about to win this.
Yeah, it was so much more effective that we knew the entire time what was happening, you know, and the pacing of the episode was like perfect because it didn't just happen right away. It was the slow build throughout the episode, and you know something's going to happen. You hope that maybe they're going to figure it out and they're all going to scatter and they're going to win in the end and get away. But it doesn't happen like that, you know.
And there's so much tragedy, so much separate tragedy in this episode. You have Syril, which we'll talk about him. There's a lot that happens with Syril in this episode. And then you have the Imperial Army guys that come in, the young guys that weren't ready for this, and even their officer, their captain, whatever, is trying to say, like, no, these guys aren't ready for this, and they make it happen anyway. And then the Empire takes the first shot on their own guys by sniping their own soldier in the head to spark the whole actual chaos.
I love that. That was so much smarter than just shooting one of the rebels and hoping that it set them off. It was so much more effective. They could prove it to the wider world. They shot first.
All for the sake of propaganda.
Yes,
yeah.
That's like one example of how smart the show is, how smart it was written, you know, because the Empire is smart.
Because they so easily could have written, like, just have the rebels, like, I can't take it anymore, and somebody just throws a punch. And then the whole scene goes into chaos, and it really wouldn't have changed the bulk of the episode. But they wrote it that way, and it just made it that much better.
And then that's the moment when you realize that's why they're sending in these young guys who are essentially kids. And in that, at least for me, in that moment, and they all start freaking out after his one guy gets shot, I was like, oh, that's why. Because I didn't understand it either. I was like, is the Empire so hard up for people? But
right.
That's not, it was all intentional.
Yeah, it was calculated.
Yeah, they were just a sacrifice.
The easy way out, and a lesser writer, a more classic Star Wars writer, would have been like, oh, let's put them all in a pile, and then the Empire just opens up and slaughters all of them. No, it's smarter and more subtle than that. Shoot your own guy. You can then blame the rebels.
Yeah.
So good. I love how they did that.
Another part of the episode, which I honestly liked as much, if not a little bit more, was Syril's arc. Him slowly realizing that he's been used by his girlfriend, Dedra, and him confronting her. I think we might have talked about this off camera, but the fact that he storms in there essentially and he chokes her, because at this point you're almost rooting for Syril in a way. You're like, yeah, you're finally realizing what's good. And I think that him choking her, especially since obviously she's a woman, it reminds you that he's not a good guy. He might have his doubts, his insecurities, which makes you like him a little bit in a weird way, but he's not a good guy. And she realizes that too, that she might have been in over her head, or as I like to say, girl boss too close to the sun. I thought that scene was very impactful.
I do think he really believes his motives are all good, as opposed to Dedra, who knows she's awful. Like, I think Dedra's fully aware that she's awful, and I don't think Syril actually thinks he's bad at all.
I think one of the great choices they made with him is that he really, truly is the victim of a lot of stuff. I mean, he was just used, lied to, like, you know, bullied by his mother. He really was a victim in many ways, and that made him more sympathetic. You know, even though, to Liz's point, he was a bad guy, and he really did believe in the Imperial cause. But he also was on the receiving end of a lot of crap, and you do kind of feel for him. That scene with Dedra where he chokes her, I thought that was very well done, in the sense that Dedra has always hidden from the literal violent part of what's going on. She's always been behind the scenes. She's always been the planner, removed from the actual war. And right at that moment, you can see her. She's shocked when all of a sudden this physical violence is inflicted upon her, and she's never really been exposed to that before. And you can see it in her face. I thought that was really good with the actress, that it's all of a sudden it just stuns her. Oh my God, this is real. People get hurt, people die, and I could be one of them. You know, it's this boundary that is crossed. And I think that was really, really great. And on Syril's end, he's also never really been violent. He's always wanted to plan and scheme and kind of do what she does. but he's never been violent, even all the crap that he's taken from his mother. So for both of them, that act of choking, it was just like they both crossed a certain boundary, and it was great. I thought it was great. I guess we can talk a little bit about his end, about how he died.
Yes,
And
very abrupt.
I feel like there are a lot of things to say about that. And I still am not completely sure that I'm on board with how they did it. I think there's an argument to be made for why it was done.
I can totally see why you may be conflicted. I'm totally sold on it. I thought that having such an abrupt ending, purposefully giving Syril an ending that he doesn't deserve, I feel like is so in line with his character arc. He didn't deserve anything that happens to him, and he didn't deserve to have an ending written so abruptly where he just gets shot in the head, and I think it's on purpose, you know?
I agree, because it shows that in the moments leading up to his death, it kind of pans around, you kind of see him looking around, you think he's going to change his mind and join the rebellion or do something, and you're thinking as a viewer, you're like, oh, is this the turning point for the rebels? You know, somehow this one guy flipping, he has the information, he has this and that. And then he sees Andor, and that's all gone. He sees his arch enemy trying to kill his girlfriend, and that's all gone, and he tries to kill him. And I agree with you, Nick. I think that his end is very fitting because it's meaningless.
Exactly. I feel like there are two things that Syril wanted in the entire series, even from season 1. One is to find Cassian and take him down, and the other is to become somebody, like to become something of importance. And somebody of importance would have had a more poetically written death. And it's like having him shot in the head like he's a nobody right before he gets to take down Cassian is just makes him the ultimate tragic character.
Agreed. And he had a chance. You as a viewer, you see he had a chance. You thought he was going to turn it around and join the rebellion, which would have made his existence significant, if you will. And that doesn't happen. It's his own, he's blinded by his own hate, essentially. And that's why he dies the way he does. And I agree with you. It's all around tragic, but I think it's very well written.
Yeah.
Well, and I kind of see Syril as like perpetually the kid who was never invited to the cool kids table. He's always, watching as all of these other Imperials are doing important things. They're liked by their peers. They're accepted. And he has just never been that.
He didn't even get to be a part of the real empire. He's still stuck at that company that's like an offshoot.
I know. And
The Death Star contractors.
yes. Yeah, I mean, I really do feel for the guy, as bad as he is, and his motives aren't pure. They're not good, but I don't know. Maybe it was just so well done that he was so tragic, and it was just like they just cut him off in the middle of his story. I was just like, man.
You definitely don't see it coming. Like when he gets shot in the head. At least I didn't. I did not see it coming. Like,
the entire series, I was waiting for him. Even in season 1, I'm like, I actually like this. He's going to turn to the rebels. He's going to, or at the very least understand that the Imperials are not on his side. And he just kind of leaves and just does his own thing. But to be killed in that way, I'm just like, in a series of tragic characters, might be the worst.
Absolutely.
It's so bad. It's like so good. It's so bad. I don't know. I'm still... I don't dislike it, but I don't think I'm completely 100% on board the way you guys are.
Yeah.
Another important thing is towards the end of this episode, we see the KX droids.
Yes.
Which I don't know about you guys, as soon as I saw them, I was like, oh, that's K2SO.
Yeah.
One of them.
Yeah, you see them, you're like, well, one of them is the guy.
And usually I'm not a huge fan of like fan service or cameos for no reason, but I think that was well done, even though it wasn't necessarily very important to the story of Andor. It is important to the story of Rogue One.
Exactly.
And I thought it was well done.
Yeah, I think that if we had made it to the end of Andor and not seen K2SO, I think it would have just left us wondering where he comes from in Rogue One. So I do think at some point they had to throw him in here. So I'm not even sure I would call it fan service, because I feel like I would have been wondering where he was if we then, especially with how close the end of Andor is to the start of Rogue One, I would have definitely wondered where the heck that guy came from. So, like, I like where they put him in, but I like that we see him start as a regular KX droid, and we see all those KX droids wrecking that entire crowd of Gorman rebels. And I know we're going to get to episode 11 when we get there, but I think that they very deliberately showed those KX droids being basically unstoppable. That way, like, we had the perfect setup for how unstoppable K2SO is later on in episode 11, where he's unstoppable coming to Cassian's rescue. And, like, we knew from the get-go, the moment he's like, oh crap, I gotta do something, before he even starts his, rescue mission, we already know, like, all right, he'll be fine. Because we know what KX droids are capable of now, and because we've seen it 3 episodes ago. I thought it was a good setup for that.
He had to be in the show.
Yeah. He was already my favorite droid just from Rogue One, and this show has just continued to make him such an enjoyable character. I think Alan Tudyk is such a good voice actor. He's such a good actor in anything I've ever seen him in, but he's such a good voice for K2SO. The writing is so good on him. There's actually, on that topic, I can't think of a single scene where I have an issue with the acting in the series. Like, I think all of the actors and actresses did so well with their parts. And there are times where the actors are great, but the writing could be better, which was like an issue with some of the prequel stuff, like with some of the dialogue. Like, Ewan McGregor is a great actor, but some of his lines aren't great because writing.
Because George Lucas.
Because George Lucas, unfortunately. And then there's been times where it's been the opposite. Like, man, that line would have been great if it was delivered by somebody who knew how to deliver it. None of those things are the case in this show. Like, the writing's great, and everybody knows how to deliver everything perfectly.
Well, I think the people who created the show wouldn't allow that. You know what I mean? They had such a high standard that they wouldn't, if something was not delivered well, they're like, well, we're going again. Like, you got to do it right in order for us to maintain this level of quality.
I think most writers and directors believe they're that way.
They're just not smart
but
enough.
They just sometimes aren't, and these ones are. I don't know.
No, I agree. That was one of the, even from the first 2 episodes I watched, I was like, oh, this is good, because everything was believable. The way it was acted, the way the lines were delivered, the writing, it was all good.
I just had one more thing on the KX droids. You guys might not agree with this. It might be a little nitpicky, but there were all those KX droids, right? And the one I would have guessed the least to turn into K2SO was the one that ended up getting smashed into a wall, and like the force that he was hit, with that vehicle, and then he comes out and he's smashed, he's all messed up. And I did have a little bit of a hard time believing that was the one who ended up turning into K2SO.
I feel like it's implied they had to put a lot of work into him to get him operational in such a way.
Yeah, and I guess I just hadn't seen it that way, and it kind of makes sense if you think about it that way. I just hadn't really, I'm like, oh, well, now look at him. Very little time has passed, and now he's pristine and perfect.
I wonder how much time they wanted to imply had passed. Like, I wonder, like, when they wake him up and he's got a different personality because they had to change it out of necessity. I wonder if that's supposed to be like a couple of days later, a month later. Like, sometimes it's hard to tell how much time has passed in this show unless they give us a definitive time jump.
I think so. How I saw it was that it was about like a few weeks or a month later, but it's also implied they had a lot of people working on him because there's all these people in the garage. And the other thing,
the garage,
the droid shop.
In the garage,
garage.
It kind of is a garage, though.
It is.
Yeah.
It might even have a door that goes up into the ceiling.
The other thing,
door for X-wings.
The other thing I was going to say is that it's canon. How many times does C-3PO get completely demolished and then like 2 seconds later he's fine? So I think droids can just do that. You know, they're just really easy to fix.
Well, I mean, in Empire, he gets blown apart into pieces and then just gets fixed by a walking carpet, like, not half an hour later.
And then he's getting a battle droid head in episode 2. Yeah. While his head's going on a battle droid, and then they just put them back together like it's no problem.
They're easily fixed for plot reasons.
Yeah. So there you go. K2SOs easily fixed for plot reasons also.
All right, now going into...
Oh, wait. Before we move on to episode 9. Episode 8 gives us the rebellions are built on hope line from the dude in the hotel.
Yes, that's right. And I thought that was really cool how it was like the thesis for Rogue One. I think, is it Andor or Jin who says it's Andor? Mm-hmm. Right?
I think Jin says it. Because I seem to remember the trailer for Rogue One having Jin say it. Maybe not.
But she says it as a reaction. She hears it from Andor first.
I think you're right, yes. Oh, it would have to be from Andor because he got it from this guy.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and it's like such an important thing just came from this kid in the lobby of a hotel.
Yep.
That was really cool. I love that.
They even make the side characters that like are pretty like nothing characters really likable. Like this guy, that was like a bellhop for him and like gives him like a little extra heads up the next time he sees him. A long time later too, like he still recognizes him, and like even those little characters are like well written.
I know. I just had a big smile on my face. That second part of it, I was like, yes, the kid. He's in on it.
Yes.
Hell yeah.
All right, now going into episode 9. Welcome to the Rebellion. So I thought the first few scenes were really impactful. You see the TV footage of how the Empire is spinning the massacre on Gorman.
Yep.
And I mean, at least I had this reaction like, oh my God, this is so wrong. It worked out so well for the Empire. This is exactly what they wanted. And it just feels so wrong because we know as a viewer what happened. And this is also the scene where we we see more of Mon Mothma again and her speech to the Senate.
Yeah, I mean, they made her one of the most well-written characters in all of Star Wars in this show, and then of course episode 9 like really solidifies that.
Agreed. And I want to check in with you because you're more familiar with the lore, but as I saw it, because this episode 9 directly ties into an episode of Rebels where they're rescuing Mon Mothma, and they see it on a little hollow thing, her giving the speech to the Senate. This whole Gorman arc was made because of that in Rebels. Am I right in assuming that?
Yeah, well, you and I went back and watched it. I read about it, and I'm like, really? It connects with Rebels? But the name of that planet, Gorman, actually came from a Rebels episode. So that wasn't even an invention of Tony Gilroy. It was invented way back when, and so then they just took that and ran with it and made this whole backstory leading up to her speech.
It shows that Tony Gilroy has great respect for his source material.
I know, for as much as he says he wants this to be different, he still understands that it exists within a wider world.
Yes.
And he respects that, which is cool. This, other than the episode we just spoke about, might be my favorite episode. It was such a cool thing because you know that it had to happen because we see the age of Mon Mothma being part of the Senate, and then at some point she's part of the rebellion. There had to be a bridge between the two, and you know that if she just spoke out openly against the Emperor,
it's going to be treason, and she's going to be...
Yeah, like immediately, and we know she's not in prison because she's in the rebellion later, so something had to happen. There had to be an escape, and the entire episode is this escape. And it's literal. They don't talk about it in general terms. It's like minute by minute. She gives the speech. There's somebody waiting for her. Even who that person is. There's like a backstabber who's they have to avoid and put Andor in place to actually get her out.
Yeah, it wasn't like, well, I'll give my speech on the 8th, and the Empire's not going to like that, so I'll catch a flight on the 9th out of here. Like, no, it's like I'm going to finish my last word, and I immediately have to get the heck out so I do not die.
I thought the scenes, too, of her leaving after she gave the speech, which, by the way, that speech was incredible. I think the actress delivered it so well, and we were able to see different groups of people watching it, right? If I remember correctly, I think that was well done. But I really even like the scene after she gives a speech and she has to escape, even though it's kind of like almost a cliche escape scene. But I thought it was well done, and it was still suspenseful, even though we know she gets out of there successfully because we have other material with her in it that takes place later. There's still suspense.
And I think she finds herself in a similar situation to Dedra, where she had never been really there for any of the direct physicality of war. She'd never been there and experienced the violence, and her eyes get opened real quick during this escape scene where, not that she was oblivious, and I don't think Dedra was oblivious either, but just hadn't experienced it. And now on her way out, with Cassian leading the way with a gun, that she has to experience the realities and the actual physical part of war.
Well, it's the difference between hearing about something and witnessing it right in front of you. One just little detail that I love about that episode is that leading up to her speech, it was like this procedural maneuver, that actually allowed her to make the speech. It was like this technicality, and I thought that was kind of funny.
I thought that was interestingly
You know what I mean?
written.
With Bail Organa?
Yes, like giving his time up to her.
Yeah, because they had to find some way to get her to be able to speak. And, right before that, there's another senator, and he starts off, the victims, these poor, tragic victims, and it sounds like it would be about the rebels. And then he turns and he's like, no, our son of the empire or something. And you're like, holy jeez, they really did spin that well so that everybody thinks the rebels are the bad ones.
What I also like, jumping back a little bit, is a scene between Mothma and Luthen where I think she also realized, she kind of knew it before when he had her childhood friend killed, but she realizes fully how ruthless he is and how he doesn't care about her. He cares about what she means to the rebellion and her place in this, basically her place in the rebellion. I thought that was a really good scene, and he tells her, the guy who's coming for you, he's going to say, I have friends everywhere. And you really don't know if she's going to go for it until it happens. And then it's not even really like she makes a decision. It's just kind of like she has to. And I thought it was very, very well done.
Yeah. And there's the scene where they're kind of in this group of people, right? Where this person who was to betray her just opens, just comes out and just points a gun at her. You know what scene I'm talking about?
Yep.
Yeah. At the end of that scene, they're leaving and she throws off her cape or whatever, this outer piece of clothing that she has. And it's what she wore when she was in the Senate. And it's like the symbolic, I'm shedding myself of, my role as a senator, and I am now a rebel. And I thought that was kind of a cool, subtle way of showing that transition. And then Andor blasts her driver,
Right.
And they could have easily just they just keep running, but no, she freaks out. And he's like, come on, we have to leave. And it's just a real struggle.
It made it so much more real.
Yeah, that was so good.
And then I think it's so interesting for them to, even the rebels have, not to the same degree, but even the rebels have a little bit of their own stories they have to spin, their own propaganda, because they rewrite the story to have Mon just coming in with a Yavin escort that's not Cassian, so that for whatever reason, so that the rest of the rebellion on Yavin doesn't really know the details of her escape from Coruscant, which I thought was very interesting.
I thought that was interesting too. And then back on Yavin 4, we have the scene between Cassian and Bix, which I just thought was so sad.
Bix's monologue is so hard to listen to, knowing what's coming in Rogue One.
It is. And it's kind of this thing where I don't know, while I was watching it, I'm like, I'm not sure if I agree with her. I'm not sure if I would make that same choice, because she's not making a choice to protect him because she loves him. She's making this choice for the rebellion. That's more important to her than anything. And while I was watching that scene, I was kind of like, well, it's why? You don't know for sure that he will have this instrumental part. You think you know because of what the Force healer told you, but you don't know this for sure. And it kind of seemed, it wasn't very understandable for me at that point. Later on, you kind of find out more why.
Yeah.
But
I think it reveals more about her character. Not only that she believes in the rebellion ultimately, she's a true believer in the Force. And I mean, it made such an impact on her. That woman, you know, she wasn't a Jedi, but you know,
the Force healer lady.
Yes, that Force healer lady. She really believed in that stuff, and it was important enough to her that she would make this choice. And you only really understand it later. You know, she knows that Andor loves her. You know, I think she said, like, I believe it, or I know. She knows that he really, really loves her, and he would give it all up for her, and she cannot allow that. Especially since he knows she's pregnant. He doesn't know that.
And I think there's a couple of different ways you can take her decision in association with her pregnancy. Like, you can take it as, like, she's kind of doing it as a protection for her child because she knows that Andor is, you know, so involved in something that's not a great setting to bring up a child in. Or you can take it, and the way I take it is, like, she was such a firm believer in the rebellion and in the Force that she actually made this decision, like, in lieu of the fact that she's pregnant. Like she knows that it would be better for her kid to have his father, but she thinks that there's a much more important thing, that Andor's destiny is much more important than her family.
I think it also speaks to her character, and it helps in letting the audience not view her as soft, because it's not an easy decision. It's not necessarily a decision made out of love. It's a decision made out of necessity. And I think that's very important to her character, lest we forget that she's not a victim. She's not soft. She's not just doing this for love. She's doing it because she believes in it.
Yeah, and out of necessity for the galaxy, not for herself.
Exactly.
It's also completely selfless in her, if you interpret it the way that, like, she's doing this in lieu of the fact that she's pregnant. I think it shows her to be a very noble person as well.
Agreed.
Well, and I think it shows this very real realization on her part that Andor really, really does love her. You know, because she would not make such a drastic decision if she didn't fully understand that he really loves her and he would do anything for her. And that's a bad thing for the rebellion.
Yeah.
And so it totally makes sense, especially if he finds out that she was having his child. Even more so, he wouldn't leave and he would abandon the rebellion. So she had to do what she had to do.
And I love that we don't find out about her pregnancy until the end of the last episode. And then, like, now we have all this stuff to think about episodes ago. Like, and we get all this clarity as to, like, where her head was.
Yeah, you wonder where along the line that she found out, because she was using drugs and she just at some point stops. So somewhere in that, you know, if you want to make her even more likable, part of it is she understands that she's pregnant. She finds out, and then she stops using just for her child's sake. And
when is the last time jump? Because her kid, how old do you think her kid is? Maybe a couple years old?
I saw her kid as like maybe...
like a year and a half?
Yeah, a year and a half. And my initial reaction when I saw that, because it's one of the final scenes, I was like, oh, she's moved on. That's crazy. And then I realized, like, oh, wait, no, that's his kid.
Jesus.
That was my first thought.
Yeah.
But to answer your question, the next time jump is episode 10. It's a year later. So that would make sense. She's been pregnant, probably has a baby. Baby's about a year and a half, maybe 2 years old. It
Yeah,
works.
I was just trying to think, like, did she know when she left, or did she find out after she left and chose not to come back and tell him?
I think she knew already.
Yeah, probably.
too.
That's how I read it. I would love to actually go back, and I bet the show is well written enough. At some point, you could see when she found out, just on the way she starts acting. I would love to actually go back and view some of these. I don't know if it happened during one of the gaps, you know, where there's a time jump, but I wonder if there's an episode in between which she found out she didn't know at one point, and then she knew like the very next episode, and maybe her behavior changes. There's something subtle there that you would never know about until the very end.
Yeah.
She is a good character, even though she chooses the rebellion over love. Like maybe that also is a good thing. She chooses the wider galaxy over her own personal relationship with him.
It's like kind of the theme of the show is like everybody doing everything for the cause, and specifically the cause. Everybody just believes wholeheartedly in the cause and makes all their decisions because of it.
Well, you know what that is a Jedi thing. The Jedi choose the wider galaxy over everything else. And she believes in the Force. She believes in this Force healer. It was a very Jedi thing to do.
Agreed. And it's a good contrast if you think about Anakin turning Darth Vader. That all happens because he was choosing his own personal feelings and love, if you want to call it that, over the greater good. So I thought that was a nice, interesting thing. It's like the antithesis of that.
Yeah.
Well, I'm such a romantic personally. I was kind of pissed off at her. Even when I found out everything, I'm like, you find true love and you let it go. This man would have done anything for you. That's just my own personal maybe bias.
No, I think that's the natural reaction. That's the human reaction. And I think that's exactly what they wanted us to feel. It was like, no, why would you do this? Like, and of course it hurts worse because we know what's coming in Rogue One, but we're like, no, this is the worst decision you could make for him. But it's also the best decision she could make for the galaxy.
You know what was kind of awkward? Was knowing, and I had kind of forgotten, Andor kind of like moves on with Jyn. You know, like at the very end, they kind of embrace, and there's sort of a quasi-love story between him and Jyn. And I'm like, he truly loved her. But then later, and we know the real reason, it hadn't been written yet. That he had this relationship with Big.
That's the classic Star Wars curse, is the out of order writing.
Well, here's the reason. It's because all men are the same.
I truly love you. I'm moving on.
Anyways, all jokes aside, moving to episode 10.
Okay, I know I just said this about Mon Mothma, but this is how good this show is. Now we have yet another one of the best written characters in all of Star Wars because of episode 10.
Luthen?
Clea.
Yes.
A little side note, I was doing some research, and the actress who played Clea, I can't remember what her name is right now, that was her first role out of acting school. She hasn't been anything else, like TV productions, anything else. That's her first role that she landed, and it's incredible.
I did not know that. That makes it even more incredible.
Yeah.
I think some people are just born with a gift. You know, they're just meant to do something. Now, the episode we're just talking about, is that the episode where Luthen kills, who's the red-haired guy on the bench?
Lonnie. So that's the episode that's coming up.
I want to talk about that scene.
Well, episode 10 is the hospital heist, right? Or is that episode 11?
It's all the same thing. It's all the same. So it's called Make It Stop. It's a year time jump.
So does Lonnie tell Luthen at the beginning of this episode he kills Lonnie, and then later on in the same episode he kills himself? I mean, he doesn't succeed, but you know what I mean.
The hospital scene has to happen after Luthen is injured,
right?
Yes,
and obviously he's not injured when he has this interaction with Lonnie.
Yeah. So it has to be this episode. Yes,
it's all in episode 10, which is
yeah. Let's talk about that.
Poor Lonnie. Oh my god, this guy is just. Luthen has him by the balls, and
the Empire has him by the balls. He's got one nut in two different people's hands, like.
Incredible way to put that, sir.
He's not wrong.
Stuck between a ball and a hard place. But I feel so bad for that guy. He was trying to do the right thing.
He goes to Luthen in such good faith, like, oh, look what I found out. Like he did exactly what Luthen wanted him to do, and Luthen's like, thank you so much. Please die.
I do see this difference because I think they implied in the first season that Lonnie wasn't a true believer in the cause, that he was only doing it to protect his family because Luthen threatened him, basically. But somewhere along the line, I think he started to believe in the cause because in the second season, you can tell. his interactions with Deidre, kind of going behind her back, and then the danger he puts himself in. And so kind of the things that he says, I think that somewhere along the line, he did start to believe in the cause, which makes it even worse.
Yeah, and then his whole, like, Luthen telling him that he's going to be able to keep him and his family safe on Yavin.
It's terrible.
That's so rough.
It is. But and Luthen only told him that so he could get the information he needed. Like, Luthen is, I don't know, he becomes this robot by the end of it, where he just truly he cares about one thing and cares about absolutely nothing else.
And again, it's one of those things where it might be the best tactical decision. If he's dead, the Empire's never really going to find out why his wife and kids will be safe. They will be safe,
True.
Possibly safer than they would be on Yavin at the end of the day. Doesn't mean it's the right decision necessarily, but tactically speaking, he is keeping his wife and kids safe. But it's so sad still.
Yeah.
Well, and that whole scene, that interaction, like a lot of things in this show, you only find out after the fact why certain characters were acting the way that they were acting. And Luthen is very insistent. You need to tell me your information right now, instead of like, you can tell me in a couple hours. Like, you can tell me in half an hour. I need to know right this second, because he's going to kill him, tie off that loose end. He is now the carrier of the knowledge. He doesn't necessarily know that he's going to die or have this interaction with Deidre that soon, but in order for him to be able to do what he needs to do, he needs that information right at that second. And you only learn that afterward when he kills Lonnie, because you're like, that's why he wanted to know immediately.
I agree. And to your point, saying that he doesn't know that he's going to die, I think that he knows as soon as he gets confronted by Dedra that he's going to try and kill himself, hopefully successfully in his eyes. And I also think that he knows it's coming down the line probably today, probably within the next few hours. And that's why he's so rushed also to tell Clea what the information is. Yeah,
and I keep going back to his monologue in the first season, but he says in that monologue in the first season, like, he says something along the lines of, like, I'm fighting for a sunrise I know I'll never see. Like, he's known for years that he's not going to see the fruits of his labor. He's either going to be killed or be forced to kill himself to protect what he knows, and this is the day that it happens.
Well, yeah, and to Liz's point, he has a vague understanding that he's going to die, but as soon as he sees Deidre enter, his store or whatever, he's like, this is it. The day has come.
He's like, hey, check out this cool knife.
I actually think that he knew before Deidre came to the store, because he's already destroying the communications equipment before she comes in.
That's true.
That's true. He knows something's going to happen. I think what he thought is that he's leaving. Not necessarily he's going to die, but he has to get rid of the evidence before he takes off.
That's what I was thinking. Like, he's leaving the planet behind, and so he's got to destroy the evidence that's there. But I don't think he planned to try to kill himself at this point. I think I took it as he was trying to leave it all behind.
Yeah, and that scene, as with most scenes or all scenes in the show, it was so well done because there's this unsaid thing between them. They each know what they are. She knows he's a rebel. He knows she's here because of the information he has. And it's this pretense for a while at the beginning. And then at some point they just drop the pretense. And it's like, it's you, it's you. And Luthen just wanders over, grabs the knife, which I feel stupid. I didn't see coming. I didn't see Lonnie getting killed. I didn't see that. And I was shocked when it happened.
I think I saw Luthen stabbing himself more than I saw Lonnie getting killed. Like, I feel like in the moments before Luthen stabbed himself, I felt like it was coming. I did not see just seeing dead Lonnie later on the bench. I did not see that coming.
That one surprised me more too. I saw Luthen killing himself as soon as he's showing Dedra the knife, because he has so many things he could show her. Obviously, he's showing her that so he has a pretense to have it, because he holds it the whole time.
I thought he was going to attack her with it.
I did not know what she was going to pull out. I knew something was up, but I did not know what artifact she was going to pull out, and it ended up being that thing from season 1.
Yeah. And that leads into him being injured badly.
Yeah, and then for our sake, for any of our listeners who don't remember, we all the three of us are all paramedics. For our sake, we get to see, feel like for the first time ever, what an in Star Wars ambulance looks like that picks up Luthen. I'm like, oh, that's what our job would look like.
I want one of those gurneys that just hover.
Yeah, but I was kind of disappointed by the inside. There's no place to sit. There's no bench seat or airway seat or anything. They just kind of stand there next to his floating stretcher. I'm kind of disappointed in that.
It's good for their backs.
Yeah, I guess.
So in preceding this, just backing up real quick, Clea, if he understands that he's the only carrier, he has to get somebody else in possession of this knowledge. And up until this point, she's been around, kind of in the background. And I thought she was like a spy. I thought she was going to betray him at some point. That was kind of the sense that I got. I'm like, oh man, she's going to turn on him, or she's spying on him, and she's going to kill him at some point. And it went in the complete opposite direction. She is a complete believer, just like him. And God, she's such a good character. Like, I wanted more time with her. That's my only complaint.
Yeah, I already liked her. Like, before this point, I already thought she was like a cool little Luthen sidekick. And she ends up being like easily as good of a written character as Luthen is. Like, and then seeing their history with like him being like a father figure for her, even from her as a kid, and getting her involved in this lifestyle from a very young age, and helps us see why she becomes the kind of person she is. And her whole like hospital heist thing is like one of the best parts of the season.
Agreed. And I was going to ask
the
you...
poor granny getting pushed around by her.
That was really funny.
I was going to ask you, Nick, do you know what war that was that Luthen's in the flashbacks where he first sees Clea? Because we were trying to figure out, was he a part of the Empire? Because that's almost what it seems like.
I had to actually look it up because I was also confused. He is part of the Empire. And it was almost like a Finn situation where he was part of a massacre. He saw this horrible thing happening in front of him, and they implied that he also took part. Unlike Finn, he actually did kill some people with them, and that is what drives him. That's why he is the way he is, because he killed innocent people alongside the Empire, and it was this horrible, horrible thing, and it became his motivation.
I'm glad you looked that up, because I wondered the same thing and then forgot completely about it.
I thought it was like the Clone Wars. I wasn't really sure. I couldn't tell.
Yeah. I mean, that's why I was wondering if he was part of the Empire. The when, I suppose, doesn't really matter as much as the who.
Yeah.
I thought it was very well done that they have this almost like father-daughter relationship, but not quite. And she shows very early on, you see it through the flashbacks, how tough she is. Especially where she goes to him, she's like, oh, so I'm your daughter now? And he says, you are whatever I need you to be. Your name's Clea now.
So great.
Yeah,
it's
really awesome. And then I love how, like, I guess if you really think about what's going on, you don't really wonder this, but I feel like you kind of wonder when she's doing the whole hospital heist thing, is she going to rescue Luthen or kill Luthen? And it makes, of course, the most sense that she's going in just to kill him, to protect what she needs to protect. But there is kind of like the hope that maybe she'll get him out of there. But nope, she just goes in, disconnects his ventilator, and leaves. And it shows you that, like, yes, there was this borderline father-daughter relationship with them, but even it is all about the cause. That's what matters most. That's what matters most to Luthen. That's what matters most to Clea. That's what matters most to Bix. That's like everybody is in this for the cause more than anything else.
One, I really think it's the only thing she could have done based on her character. It would have been simpler, easier, safer for the rebellion to kill him than to try and like revive him, get him out of there.
It would have been pretty like unbelievable for her to get him out of there.
Especially since they established earlier that when Dedra wants to interrogate him, and they're like, this room is the only thing that's keeping him alive. It's really implied that he's in critical condition. I thought that scene was so good, and it was well done with the flashbacks. We get not only background on Clea, but also a background on Luthen, why he is the way he is. And then, of course, she gets out, and we're all thinking, like, well, there's so many security cameras. We're all like, oh, no, she's going to get caught now.
Actually, just talking about it, I kind of just put this together. I don't actually know if it's true, but it might make sense. I mean, what if Luthen killed her parents? Because he was out part of the massacre. She lost her parents, I would assume, in that same massacre. Maybe he didn't directly shoot them, but he obviously feels partly responsible, if not directly responsible, for killing her parents, and makes perfect sense why he would then take charge of her, even though it was a bit of a danger to his mission or whatever. But that would be even more tragic.
Yeah.
And make more sense.
I think that does make sense.
I love the way they wrote her as a little girl, almost ruthless.
Yeah.
And I think that was Naboo that they were on, right? Where
it looked like it, or it's very similar if it's not.
And then that would have taken place, I'm trying to think of the timeline. Would that have been during episode 1 when they were occupying Naboo? Because that's the only time the Trade Federation would have been on Naboo, was during episode 1.
But then he wouldn't have been a part of the Empire.
That's true. So I don't know. I don't know exactly.
But I don't think that was the Trade Federation that they were blowing up, though, was it?
Oh, I thought I saw one of the tanks. Those very distinct tanks.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, I must be wrong.
But in that same scene, though, I thought just little things that they do that don't matter, but just are well written, was the whole, like, even teaching her when is appropriate to look at the disaster you just caused. Like, nope, not yet. Okay, now. Like, just like teaching her how to truly be this undercover person.
Yeah, because if they look before it happens, people are going to point them out.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, well, if you're going to be this ruthless, you better be good at it.
Yeah.
That's so great.
So into episode 11, we see Dedra finally getting it the way we all hoped she would.
That's a weird way to put that.
I was like,
You can cut that.
I was like, I don't remember that happening.
Oh wait, I downloaded the wrong one.
It's like I thought
knew that
Syril was dead.
Syril's not capable of that kind of manhood.
Anyways,
Not cutting that.
we should cut all of it. We see Dedra being interrogated by Krennic, and
Yes.
he basically lets her have it. Talking to her.
So it's Krennic, not Syril.
Yeah.
Dedra is being Dedra is being interrogated by Krennic.
That's not us this time.
Someone else is gonna have to say it.
Well, I have a lot to say about that interrogation.
Shoot, King.
Well, you could have these really deep things to say about that. I don't even know if it was scripted, if it was just something done off the cuff by, I forget the actor's name who plays Krennic. Yes. So he kind of walks around behind her and he just puts his finger on her forehead, or the top of his head, on the top of her head, right? And again, it's physical contact. She's not used to violence of any kind being inflicted on her, and she flinches, almost this PTSD thing.
Because up until now, she's been untouchable. Literally. Like, quite literally untouchable, that a single touch freaks her out.
Yeah, and it's done by the Empire, which is even worse. I thought that was such a good interrogation scene, and you really don't feel bad for her.
No, not at all.
You really don't. It's almost satisfying in a way. Another interesting thing, so they obviously play out on the hospital security footage, right? I think it's very interesting how they decide that they're going to catch her. They don't say she's a wanted rebel. They say that she is infected with this terrible disease, so more people will turn her in. And then we also see Clea in the safe house then, kind of leading into there, which I thought was a good scene. Kind of seeing her maybe for the first time, truly vulnerable because she doesn't have Luthen. She's all on her own now.
And then you have this whole Clea rescue that is, you know, the most of the episode, you know, is kind of focuses on, and Cassian having to leave Yavin without permission because of the message he's getting from Clea. And, you know, this is where we really, I mean, I guess we've already seen it for multiple episodes now, but even more so now, we're really seeing how organized the rebellion is at this point. You can't just come and go as you please. Like, this is now a true military base. We're not just a ragtag team of rebels. This is an army now, and you can't just come and go as you please without orders.
They have procedures.
Yeah, and Cassian's just like, nope, gotta go. And it ends up being, you know, one of a string of many things, but had this not happened, the rebellion wouldn't have won in the original trilogy. Like, this had to happen.
Well, and when they're in that room, you know, when Andor finally reaches her, again, she grabs him, repeat the words, you know, Death Star, weapon, like whatever those few words she says, because she has to, it's like a torch. Yeah. This knowledge. She has to pass the torch from Luthen to her Andor. She can't be the only carrier of this knowledge, because if she dies, it's gone.
Right.
You know, I love that, how they did that.
Mm-hmm. And she can't write it down because that's also too risky.
Yeah.
Like, you commit this to memory right now.
Another thing that I thought was interesting is the distaste that the rebels on Yavin 4 have for Luthen. They don't like him, which I think is very interesting. And I
they
can't
view
remember
him the same way they view Saw, I feel like.
Yeah, and there's a, I can't remember who says it, but someone's like, you know, he's the only reason that you guys are here. And they're like, no, like, they don't want to see it that way, which I think is interesting. I think that's it was kind of bubbling on the surface before this episode, but in this episode it's really highlighted.
That one lady, I don't know what she is. I don't know if she was a senator. There's like three of them. There's like Mon, and there's Bail, and then there's the darker skinned woman, who I think she's bald.
I'm drawing a blank.
She has the hood on. She does have hair?
Yeah.
Maybe it's because she has the hood on.
I know who you're talking about. Yes. She's a senator. I don't remember.
She was a senator? Okay. So that senator, she is the worst in this show and in Rogue One. Why do they make her so defiant of everything that makes sense in both this show and in Rogue One? Like, and not that everyone else was so easily won over either. Like, even Mon and Bail had their reservations, but like, she's so antagonistic to the things that need to happen. She's just irritating.
Agreed. Another little side note is we had the wonderful scene with Cassian, Melshi, and K2SO playing cards. That was very good. Very fun. I think at this point in the show, it needed some comic relief, and I think it did a good job of doing that.
Do you guys think that it was only there for comic relief? I mean, was there, because this show is so deep, there had to have been more of a purpose for them playing cards together.
Maybe just for the sake of world building, like to show that like they're like, this is what the rebellion would do in their downtime. You know?
And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's where we also introduced Melshi. We obviously know him from Rogue One, but it introduces him here.
I'm trying to think of who Melshi is.
That might be right or not.
Oh.
He's the guy who does the thing. Hang on.
Oh, okay. Solid.
The guy that exists.
He has the ears and the nose.
Or maybe they're just trying to show sort of a bonding between K2SO, you know, and the other characters, just to show that relationship building, and then it kind of makes more sense in Rogue One why they're kind of chummy. They know each other well. Maybe that's all that was.
Maybe, yeah. And then you have K2SO. They cut the comms, and K2SO goes through and is unstoppable once again, and we knew he was going to be because we knew what KX droids are capable of. You know who it's so tragic that we don't see again? Not that you expected to. You kind of know what happens to him, but that we don't see Andy Serkis's character again. that you just it gives us the answer we don't want. Like, not giving us any more content of him gives us the answer that we didn't want, but we knew was the case all the time, which is that he just dies because he can't swim.
Well, I think it would detract from the sacrifice that he made.
Yeah.
'Cause it was such a good little...
I know this episode's about season 2, but just God, that scene is so sad when he can't swim.
Yeah, the entire time he knows that it means his death if he helps them escape, that he knows that he can't swim. And I'm like, I'm glad that they didn't. He's such a great actor.
He is.
He is, but I don't think it would have made sense if they brought him back.
And then the finale, I did not expect it to butt up against Rogue One so closely.
Yeah, I didn't either.
And I think we might have said this earlier. It was kind of one of our longer episodes, so I forget the things we haven't said. But I watched the last 3 episodes, and you guys too. We all did this separately, but we watched the last 3 episodes of season 2 of Andor and Rogue One all in succession, because it didn't feel like episode 12 of season 2 is the series finale. They made it feel like Rogue One is the series finale. Like, they butted up so closely to it. He's on his way to the first scene.
Agreed. Something else that we kind of touched on earlier, but the only thing that really irritated me about this, and it's good writing, it's not a criticism of the writing, but why do none of these people believe that the Empire is building a Death Star?
Because it's such, like, this is nothing of this scale has ever been done before.
I suppose.
Like, a weapon that can blow up an entire planet, because we've seen the second Death Star and Starkiller Base, and like, we've seen the power creep over time, and so we've seen, like, yeah, that's what the bad guys do, is blow up planets. But like, at this point in time, like, that was such a crazy idea that anybody could build a weapon that could literally blow up a whole planet. So I feel like that's why, like, nobody believes it, because if somebody told me that, I'd be like, yeah, okay.
That's fair. That's fair. I guess that kind of was, as a viewer, it was like, oh my gosh, you guys, like, don't you understand? All these people went through all this trouble, and you almost think it's not going to happen because they're just like, no, we don't believe her because she worked for Luthen.
All the years of sacrifice, we don't believe you.
Yeah.
Exactly. And that, again, underlines that this is now an army because they're all grounded, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
I did want to say one thing about, like, watching the 3 episodes and then moving to Rogue One. I've seen a lot of videos online, just like on YouTube. I feel like 90% of people who watched Andor immediately jumped. My mom did it too.
It's like you have no choice. It's like you feel like you didn't finish you didn't finish the episode almost.
Yeah, and I think Liz made a comment about this, because that's exactly what we did. We immediately watched Rogue One. You're kind of disappointed when you forget Andor's not the main character in Rogue One. Jin is the main character.
Yeah.
And you like the show. I like the show so much. I'm like, oh yeah, he's just a side character. I want more of Andor.
I do think it's interesting that some people feel like it's out of character, and they blame the backwards writing for this, that Rogue One came out first. But I don't think it's out of character. I think it makes a point as the kind of person that Cassian has been forced to become when he kills that guy right at the beginning of Rogue One to keep information safe. It's like, maybe at the end of season 1, I would have felt like it's out of character for him to do that. But like, at the point he's at now, like, he also believes in nothing but the cause. He's now been a part of some information handoffs that were like so unbelievable, like so incredibly in need of protection. And I don't know. I don't think it was out of character for him to kill that guy at the beginning of Rogue One. I felt like it showed the kind of person he had become now.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think it's really that out there. And it's been established throughout, it's been established throughout Andor is that he is willing to kill. He might not like it, but it's not completely out of character for him.
That guy, I feel like the reason people say this is because Cassian's not afraid of killing ever. but everybody he kills is always bad people. That guy, just giving him info, seems to be on his side. He's like, cool, thanks, bam. It was actually a very Luthen move. Just like Luthen killing Lonnie, Cassian doing that was a very Luthen move. But
I could see why people would say that it was out of character. I don't think it was, but I understand it because, like you said, it wasn't assassinating Deidre, this horrible person.
Right.
It wasn't killing Mon Mothma's driver who was going to murder her.
It was basically killing Lonnie. It was like pretty much the same context.
It was a Luthen move, really, but you could also understand after everything that had happened that he would move in that direction.
Yeah, I think it shows that he went from hating Luthen, being done with that lifestyle, to almost becoming him. It's like it almost makes Cassian a little bit tragic.
I mean, he does die at the end of Rogue One.
Well, I mean, yeah, that part's objectively tragic, but yeah.
Speaking of shooting people, the only part of the show that I did not like and that I can't rationalize within the story is Partagaz killing himself, the Imperial.
Yes.
Oh, why?
It seems like it came out of nowhere. How did you see his motivations for that? Because it didn't really make sense to me.
I agree with her. I did not see that coming or agree with it.
I felt like he was a failure. He saw himself as a failure, and he believed that the Empire would do worse to him than he could do to himself by killing himself.
Yeah, I mean, I could see, like, I don't disagree with it happening. I just think they could have done it in a better way. There could have been more of a gradual, maybe I missed it. It almost seemed like it was a matter of time. They just didn't have the time to put him in there, or there was some kind of like deleted scene somewhere or more that it needed to be a little more, gradual, him coming to that decision.
Maybe. I kind of took it as like a statement that Partagaz knows what the Emperor or the Empire does to people who fail them, and he knows how badly it can end for them. It would be worse than if I just died right now. To have to go to Palpatine or Tarkin or Vader or anybody who's higher than him and tell them that he failed. I mean, we've seen what Vader does to people who fail him. He just chokes them to death right in front of them.
Well, we can come up with all kinds of believable motivations for why he did what he did. It's more like the way that it was done. It's that it could have been done a little bit better. It could have been a little more gradual. We could see a couple, facial expressions or a couple more statements leading up to that, so that it's a little more clear and it's a little more, I don't disagree with it happening. It's how it was done in the show.
So I was actually just reading something, and what I didn't realize, I must have missed it watching it, is that when that other commander comes in to talk to him, he's about to be arrested.
Really?
Yeah, which I didn't realize while watching it, and I was just reading it here, and then it makes sense.
Yeah, I didn't pick up on that. I could have almost seen Deidre doing something like that, killing herself, because she's just such a believer. She's so betrayed by the Empire. I could almost see her doing that. And the final scene, which I think there was really no other way it could have ended, which is her in that same prison that Andor was in. And I was reading about it. They kept a piece of the set from the first season, and normally that stuff is just broken down. Like, they're kind of ruthless when it comes to breaking down. Like, we need the space. Like, we have to get rid of the stuff. And Tony Gilroy was like, I want you to keep one tiny piece of this. And he didn't know why. He thought that he might be able to use it. And so he put his foot down and he's like, he talked to the set director or whatever, just save this one piece of set for me. Just do me a favor. And then he ended up using it. I thought that was very cool.
It was the Force.
The Force, he knew. Final thoughts on the show here.
I think that, as I said at the beginning, I know there's some recency bias for me, and that's been an issue for me in the past. Like with Ahsoka, I think I thought I liked it a lot more than I did later.
Same.
Yeah, and so I know this has happened to me before where like the moment I finish watching something, I'm like, that was the best. And then then when I have some more time to think about it, I don't quite feel that way. And I don't think that's going to happen with this. Like, I feel like Andor is maybe for me, and I know it's debatable, there's a lot of good content, but I think for me, it's probably my favorite TV show in all of Star Wars.
Really? Yeah. I mean, I was bouncing around YouTube, and like the title of a video was like, Andor just ruined Star Wars.
False.
Because I don't completely agree with it, but I see what they mean, which is like, I really do believe the content going forward, it's just none of it's going to be as well written as this show.
Oh, in that way.
In that way.
Okay, yeah, I took that way the wrong way.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, correct.
Yes, it is ruined.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I could see what they mean. I don't think, because Tony Gilroy has said I'm not coming back for any more Star Wars. Like, I'm not. And I know that there will be some more good stuff.
I'm also okay with that, though. I don't want all of Star Wars to feel like Andor.
Yeah.
Because Andor felt very different in a very good way, but I don't want all of Star Wars to be this dark and get so far away from the fantasy stuff, because I do like Star Wars. I do view Star Wars more as a space fantasy. I don't want to get away from the Force and the Jedi and everything in its entirety. So I don't want other things to feel like Andor, but I still think Andor is the best.
Agreed. I think in terms of post-Disney Star Wars content, The Mandalorian and Andor are probably the two best for two very different reasons. I love The Mandalorian for a lot of those reasons you just laid out. There's Jedi, it's a little more mystical, it's family-friendly, if you will. But I think Andor, not even judging it as like, how good is this as a Star Wars show, just in general, I think it's one of the best shows I watched this year. It's well written, it's well acted, and I think it relays some very important messages,
I think one big reason that Andor is better than The Mandalorian, frankly, it knew when to quit.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yes. The fact that they didn't drag it on, it has an ending, and it was good from start to finish because they didn't just milk it till it was dry, which I'm worried is what's going to happen to The Mandalorian. I mean,
sort of already has.
It kind of already has. And that's why I consider this better than The Mandalorian, because after Mandalorian seasons 1 and 2, I said pretty much the same thing I'm saying about Andor. This is the best. And then season 3 came out, and I was like, that was not as good. I still think season 3 was fine. But I was like, this is not as good as The Mandalorian has been. Andor will officially never have that problem.
Yeah. Right off into the sunset as possibly the best Star Wars show ever.
Agreed. Anyone have anything else?
No.
I think I've glazed this enough.
I know.
Sticky in here.
Yeah. Okay. Settle down. All right, guys. Well, I know that we take a long time between episodes, but, as long as there is Star Wars, we will try to be here and have some good conversations. It helps when we have good content to talk about that gets us jazzed about talking about it. But Nick and I and Liz will try to proceed and give you something every year or two.
Yeah. For those who have stuck with us through our long hiatuses and not given up hope that we will show up again, thank you.
Podcasts are built on hope.
They are. Love all 5 of you.
Yeah.
Yes, indeed. All right, guys. We'll say goodbye, and we'll see you in a couple of years.
Bye.
Bye.